Hello everyone, welcome back to what I watched in Quarantine November edition. I didn't watch as much as I have in past months, but I still saw quite a bit, so let's just jump right into it. I started things off by rewatching The Prince of Egypt, because I felt like it, I don't know. I still absolutely love this one. This is one of the best movies ever made in my opinion. I want to make a video sometime describing how this film uses visual storytelling to the best of its ability, because it's pretty mind-blowing to see what the story can say without the character speaking at all at points. This movie is a miracle and I am so glad it exists. Follow that up by rewatching Inception, directed by Chris Nolan. The last time I saw this film I was feeling pretty awful, not gonna lie. I had a pretty bad neck spasm, a headache, I was on a really cold leather couch and was trying to keep myself warm with this small blanket, and I had to pee really bad, and I was at my friend's house the entire time and never wanted to go to the bathroom for some reason. So yeah, I guess I had a pretty awful experience with this one. With that said, I walked away from it feeling pretty disappointed. Not saying it's bad, because it's still like made my favorite movies of all time list, but it just wasn't that high and I didn't really like feel passionate about putting it there. I just put it there because everyone else put it there. I thought this movie was overrated for quite some time and never understood why people considered it to be such a masterpiece. I thought the characters were one note and just moved the plot along and had no personality whatsoever, and I thought the writing was just overly complex with no reason to be that way. Well, I am happy to say that this is easily one of my favorite movies now. It's up there as a top 50 of all time. I love how Nolan directs the film. I was also shocked to see how distinguishable our characters actually are. For some reason, I love shots where characters like an ensemble cast are in one frame together. I don't know why, but that just gets me excited, and I love this shot right here. It looks amazing. The visuals were mind-blowing even after 10 years, and this film actually had a shocking amount of heart, which I did not remember was there on my first watch. The movie's flawed for sure, but I just love how it uses a mainstream template to tell an art house film-like story so it can appeal to both the casual viewer and the most harsh critic. This is, in my opinion, a masterpiece in blockbuster filmmaking, and I believe it deserves all the overwhelming praise it's been getting over the years because it pulled off the impossible. What a surprise, and the reason I saw this was because I was going to watch Tenet. And no, this is not my favorite movie of 2020. Honestly, this is pretty much what I expected, a complex story delivered in a visually stunning way. I do not know how each of Nolan's films seem to get better visually, but the biggest problem I have with this is kind of the same problems everyone else has with it. The sound mixing, bass, and score are all on top of the dialogue, so I can barely understand what anyone is saying. The action was cool, but kind of unnecessary. It didn't make that much sense if you think of it in the narrative's perspective. I don't know, the characters were likable enough, but they didn't have enough depth and their motivations weren't very clear, and the story was just kind of all over the place with so many inconsistencies that I could go on all day about. This is an extremely flawed movie, but I also had a total blast with it because of how flawed it was. Not that it was so bad it was good, but more that the story was confusing for absolutely no reason and challenged me to think, is this actually smart or is this garbage? So I'm just glad it got support at the box office. I just want movies like this to be supported. I'm just so sick of these stupid, dumb superhero movies getting attention. But yeah, I would be lying if I say I wasn't bothered by all the obnoxious execution. The opening scene still slaps though, and will go down as one of my favorite opening scenes in a movie ever. I then rewatched Apollo 13 for fun, and I still consider it Ron Howard's best film. I originally gave this movie 5 stars because I never really remember having any problems with it, but now my problems mostly lie in its extreme 2.5 hour length and how I was kind of paying attention in and out, and besides that, this is kind of an epic piece of cinema that I will not soon forget. One of my favorite movies of all time for sure, but not like all the way up there, and that's mostly due to its pure sincerity, heart, and dare I say patriotism. The actors are giving it their all, and the direction is just pouring out with all that love that I have to respect all that intricate amount of work put into this project. You can tell most of it is being pretty historically accurate because of how specific the dialogue can be. Everyone is great, and it's one of my favorite historical movies of all time. It has been for years. Not as good on a rewatch, but I still really love it. I then rewatched Hot Rod. This is still my favorite comedy of the century, and it doesn't seem to be changing soon. It's just kind of perfect for everything it's trying to do. Andy Samberg is easily the funniest person working today in my opinion. The Lonely Island is the best comedic production group working today. This is one of my favorite movies ever, and y'all need to show it some respect. I followed that up with Mr. Peabody and Sherman. I had not seen this movie in years, and it honestly wasn't as good as I remembered it. It had a lot of heart, had good comedy, but that doesn't mean it's told in a coherent way, and this film is just kind of all over the place. What I think I hated about the movie the most was the character Penny, who causes the entire conflict of the film, but she never seems to get blamed for it. Constantly Sherman who's getting in trouble by Mr. Peabody, but Penny doesn't learn anything. Sherman didn't do anything wrong. It just made me really mad. I like the inside history jokes a lot, but they're kind of minimal, and that barely makes much of a difference. The humor in this, though, is actually executed in a really funny and clever way. It's just too bad it was overshadowed by kind of stupid messages and a pretty standard story. I then saw Blazing Saddles, directed by Mel Brooks, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was entertaining and funny and well made, but kind of lacked a point after a while. I liked the outrageous, nonsensical humor, but it didn't always feel natural. Some of it feels a little awkward, but not like the timing was bad or anything. It's just kind of odd in how the jokes were presented. It honestly had perhaps the most insane third act I think I've ever seen in a movie. So much is being thrown at you and it just feels so exciting. Mel Brooks was a master at filling every frame with a joke, and while that doesn't always work for me, and I've never particularly been a huge fan of his movies, I've always respected that he respects his audience and wanted to make sure that the laughs would be consistent. I like offensive humor, sorry guys, and the offensive humor in this was kind of hilarious, not gonna lie. But a lot of the other stuff just felt strange and out of place. I can't really put my finger on it. Really like this one. It's not one of my all-time favorite comedies, unfortunately. I thought I'd like it a little more, but you know, it's still great. I then rewatched Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, and I honestly loved it even more the second time. It was honestly because I seemed to catch all the references and inside jokes a lot easier than the first time. It also made me realize how clever this script is. I do not see comedies this clever anymore, especially ones produced by Judd Apatow. Why can't movies be as funny as Walk Hard these days? I will never know that, but this movie will still remain as one of my favorite comedies, maybe just one of my favorite movies of all time. I then saw Gettysburg, the 4-hour epic on the Battle of Gettysburg, and it was pretty sick. I really enjoyed watching these characters just being human and in their natural state for most of the time. This wasn't afraid of having characters just sit around and talk to each other. It really dissects the humanity in these people, that what history says is two groups of people who were opposite of one another. Just seeing them be normal people and not taking a stance on the situation too much was really admirable, and I think that historical dramas these days can't really do that because Hollywood feels this need to be really political about history for some reason, and they have a hard time presenting historical events in a raw and honest way. Speaking of raw and honest, I can tell that the creators behind this project were very passionate about it, like about the source material, because there are so many specific details they would have not come up with on their own. I can tell they were trying to be as historically accurate as possible, and I'm glad they did put that effort in because it really shows. I'm not usually a fan of historical epics like this, but the pure scale and drama mixed with the intimate and human scenes really made the full 4 hours worth my time. Oh, also I learned something, so that's good. I followed that up with Early Man, and it was a kind of a pleasant surprise. I don't know why I've been avoiding all these Nick Park claymation movies for so many years, because I love these movies' sense of humor. Chicken Run and all the Wallace and Gromit movies have always kind of been my thing. So with that said, I love the humor in this film. It's absolutely hilarious and just made me smile, you know? The story wasn't very engaging though, and the characters were pretty bland to me, except for the villain. He was hilarious. I also don't know why, but all these kids films these days seem to play random pop music in the background of a montage, and it's really obnoxious. It can make a really unique animated film blend in the background with a bunch of other random kids movies if you do that. It's just a bad idea, and they do this here a couple of times. So yeah, while the story and characters were kind of mediocre, the humor was fun, and it just left me with a smile and a couple of chuckles, so I'm glad. I then rewatched Bong Joon-ho's masterpiece Parasite, and what a surprise, it was really good. This is easily one of my favorite movies of not just 2019, but of all time. I was really blown away at how much this improved on another watch, actually. It didn't quite get those 5 stars for me. It's super close, but I feel like the emotional punches should have hit a lot harder than they did for me. I also wish the sister storyline was wrapped up in kind of a cleaner way, in a more satisfying manner. Besides those things, this is a near perfect thriller, comedy, horror, political thingy that really got me excited. This is a film that really gets me pumped about movies. I felt so much joy watching it. I felt joy because it's original, it's fun, it's not very predictable, and it's also got a lot to say about class and our mortality on a more intimate level. So it's basically everything I want in a movie wrapped into one. That is truly amazing, and no one but Bong could have pulled it off. I swear I was still clenching during that backyard scene, and I knew how it was gonna end. Man, I can't wait to watch it again. I then saw How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. If you didn't know this about me, I've never really liked this franchise. I never really felt comfortable in this atmosphere, and I never really liked the characters all that much, but the level of sincerity and heart the franchise has had, I've always found admirable. I've always had huge respect for the beauty and humanity the series has been able to capture. I've just always had problems with them, namely the characters and the voice acting. I never really found them that likable or memorable, but I was shocked that the characters in this movie were actually kind of lovable. I never really liked Jay Baruchel as Hiccup. I always found his voice annoying, but I also really liked him here. He usually has this really whiny, obnoxious tone, but since the character has matured and grown up a little bit, Baruchel's voice has become a lot softer and calmer, so I was no longer annoyed. I didn't even say this yet, but the animation was beautiful. The attention to detail on human movement, expression, and behavior is honestly mind-blowing. The beautiful settings and landscapes mixed with the really intricately designed characters just really woke me up and kind of brought me into the atmosphere, made me feel comfortable. Once I found out Roger Deakins controlled a lot of the visual aesthetic of the film, I was not surprised. Even if I didn't like the dialogue in a scene or didn't find the villain scenes interesting, because the villain is kind of generic, I was still blown away by the visuals of this movie. This had a great conclusion to a franchise I never got into and was genuinely shocked at how much I actually loved it. The ending was fitting and emotional. I felt emotional for characters I didn't even care about. And this just felt like the perfect way to end the trilogy. Check it out if you haven't seen it. It's one of the best animated films of last year. Easily the best of the trilogy for me personally. Sorry, you lovers of this series. Then I rewatched Before Sunrise. Okay, I know, it's like my fourth time watching it during the series, but I don't care. I then rewatched Dumb and Dumber, and honestly, this is one of the best comedies ever made in my opinion. It's such a stupid film, but if you look at it from a writing perspective, it's pretty genius actually. Similar to Bill and Ted, it takes true geniuses to write something truly stupid. It's hard to make dumb characters endearing and funny at the same time, but they managed to do that because they actually put thought into the jokes. Then I saw a pretty special movie, Having Fun with Dick and Jane, starring Jim Carrey. Why is this special, you may ask? Well, Jeff, it's because it's one of the few films I've seen recently where I had not seen a single review, a Rotten Tomatoes score, or anything slightly to move my opinion in a certain direction. So what I got wasn't great, but it sure was entertaining. The ending kind of just ends and there's not much to it, but that kind of adds to the charm. Basically, the movie is about Dick, played by Jim Carrey, and he lives a pretty much perfect life and everything's going great. He's got a promotion as vice president for this like stockbroking business agency he's a part of, I believe, and he goes on TV for an interview and the entire stock market crashes and everyone gets laid off. So the movie is kind of about him trying to survive after losing his job for no reason, and it's just a bonkers comedy that made me smile and chuckle quite a bit, and I just had a total blast. It's not one of the best comedies I've ever seen or anything, but I had quite a lot of fun with it. It takes a pretty simple concept and stretches it out in its execution in a really crazy way, and it just makes me happy. So I'm really glad I was able to see this without any expectation in mind. Then I saw a movie I have not seen in years, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, directed by Tim Burton. Honestly, the first 20 to 30 minutes, pre-Willy Wonka, I thought were arguably even better than the original film. It was witty and clever and had Burton written all over it. And then Johnny Depp shows up and it all goes to poop. This is where Tim Burton really went too far and got too Burton-y, if that's even a word. Basically, I loved the setup for this movie and I didn't like any of the middle stuff. Johnny Depp just did not work as this character at all. Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka was mysterious and ominous and weird and kind of creepy in all the strangest ways, but he was still full of life and wonder and just had a really charming charisma to it. Johnny Depp was just creepy and awkward and mean-spirited and not much else. They tried to have this whole Willy Wonka backstory thing and it would have worked if it wasn't executed in such an unintentionally creepy way. I hated Depp as this character, in fact. And while he is a great actor, usually this just was not the role he was born to play. And I will watch Wilder's performance 1,000 times before I ever have to hear Johnny Depp say, "Papa." Then I rewatched Frozen, and I had not seen it in many, many years. Now look, this is where I'm at on this boat. I loved it when I first saw it, and I thought it was one of the best movies I'd ever seen. It was obviously just the hype talking, and to this day, I don't know why I loved it that much. But yeah, I still kind of like this one. I don't know why people seem to hate this movie these days. I also don't know why I ever thought it was one of the best movies ever made when it was initially released. Look, this is kind of what happened. It came out in 2013, and people loved it for its creativity and originality. Little children to full-grown men loved the film, and people got kind of annoyed of how overplayed it was. The music, everything. People started to hate this this movie. They started to despise the songs, the characters, and they even started to downgrade all the work the crew put into the story and the animation. Then everybody stopped talking about it, but whenever someone brought it up, people got angry again. You see, people just got so sick of it that they never wanted to rewatch it again. My stance is that I do think it's massively overrated when it first came out and super overplayed when it first came out, and it's not amazing, but I think it's solid when it comes to a Disney animated movie. It's entertaining, it's funny, and the characters are likable and really fun to watch. It's not the best written Disney film, it's not the most well made, but it's one of the most rewatchable and entertaining, I think, from them. Anna is one of the most likable Disney protagonists I've ever seen. I just loved watching her banter with Kristoff. I loved her just being Anna. She was just such a fun character to watch, and I think Kristen Bell did a really great job with the voice acting to really heighten that likability. It's just a good movie. Leave it alone. Gosh. I follow that up with The Sandlot. This has always been a childhood favorite of mine, and this really hit me this round. Mostly because it took me back to a time I never existed. It made me feel like a kid in the 60s, and I never knew what that time was like. The film has this purity, this innocence to it, that I can't really find in many movies with kid actors anymore. There's just this genuine good nature and heart that isn't present in movies like Good Boys, where the kids are just disgusting and raunchy for 2 hours. This film understands that kids are important and their problems, while they may not seem huge to us, are important. This movie has always made me laugh and smile my entire life. There is something so close to me about it, so special about it, and I can't really explain into words what it really means to me. You know, just seeing these boys playing baseball in their white t-shirts and jeans with such a free-spirited, accepting attitude has always made me feel like I'm a member of this group. I wanted to be friends with these kids. They were my friends growing up, but I never knew them. You throw it in with the great narration from David Mickey Evans, the director, and you got one of the best coming-of-age movies ever made. I don't like baseball, but this film makes me feel like I do. There's no way this could have not been a 5-star movie, and it's all due to the nostalgia and purity that is almost non-existent in modern family films. I then watched a different movie that I had not seen before, and this was The Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson. I've heard a lot about this movie over and over again, and I'm happy I was finally able to have the stomach to watch it. I'm just gonna say this now, this is the most violent movie I've ever seen. I've definitely seen more violent movie moments and movie scenes for sure, but when it comes to consistent, dreadful, disturbing violence that feels never ending, this movie's gonna provide that for you. This movie never has a moment of levity, except for maybe a few flashbacks, but even those contribute to the narrative. I like how the movie cuts out all the character development and setup and just jumps right into the stuff. It doesn't waste any time trying to help you get to know what's going on, it just assumes, and honestly, you don't need to have to read these events prior to understand what's going on. I've always considered this event to be the most important event in human history when it comes to me, a Christian's perspective. This is kind of the moment that changed everything, if you believe it happened or not. This movie doesn't force you to really have an opinion on the subject matter, it just presents it in a raw and honest way, and even, yeah, it does go a little over the top with its violence. Now the violence is nonsensical and inhuman, and that's what the message really is. Always believed that the suffering that Jesus has had to go through at the time was emotional turmoil, but this film can't really visualize emotional pain and anguish, so it stretches out the violence to go a little too far for a reason, obviously. The reason is to make you feel like you're this man in this situation, even if it is pretty exaggerated. The movie doesn't try to add more than that, and that's what I kind of admired about it. My biggest issues with the film were just the weird visions. They tried to act like it was this really profound stuff, but it just made this already disturbing film to go to a different level by having all these horror elements in there for some reason. It just did not fit with what was going on. I just kind of laughed when it showed Satan yelling in hell. It was just kind of unnecessary and didn't really have any service to the plot. So if they cut out some of that imagery, I think I would still consider this a really powerful interpretation of one of the most important religious events in history. Then I saw The Help, and I really liked it. What I loved most about it was an all-female cast, and it never once paraded around saying they were all female and didn't need no man in their life. It never dumbed down the male characters, it just didn't show them that much because they were not very important for this particular story. I hate how Hollywood feels this need to remake movies that have already existed with female characters just to be like, oh, well, we support women, now give us your money, please. And then they do the same thing with like comic book movies and stuff too. They just make the females like really overpowered, and it's just stupid. This film just quietly has an all-female cast and doesn't make a huge deal out of it. Sorry, that was my rant of the day. The characters were really brought to life with these fantastic actresses, and they really stick with you. Viola Davis, though, gives the best performance in the film easily. She's the heart and soul of the movie, and her alone really made the experience worthwhile. I also love how it spends time with all these different characters with all these different backgrounds and just proportions the perspectives in a way that feels respectful to the actual people. I like it when a movie does that. For being 2.5 hours long, I didn't really feel the length. It never really overstayed its welcome. This was just a good, solid movie. Not the most memorable or anything, but it was one that will be in my mind for quite some time. Thanks to The Help.
Eat my.
Then I watched Your Name and I didn't love it. I've heard so many people gush about this movie, and I've also heard a lot saying that it's overrated. I went in with open eyes and did really like it. The animation was gorgeous and some of the best I have ever seen. I mean, just look at it. The characters were really fun and distinguishable as well. I liked the twist a lot. I loved the satisfying ending, but I just felt like the setup was a little messy. It got off on a really rocky start, and it continued a little smoother, but the execution of the story was still pretty messy. Sometimes I felt there were some plot points that just got kind of repetitive, and I just didn't like how they had too much trust in the audience. They know exactly what's going on and what was happening immediately. I wish it took some time to really explain itself a little better. This was funny, it was tense, it was interesting, and it really did make me think. But if it wasn't so self-indulgent in the way the story was delivered, I would have enjoyed this one a lot more. I've heard people refer to this movie as their comfort food, and I can honestly get behind that. The world and animation is just so comfortable and so easy to get lost in. If it was just better told and didn't have as many inconsistencies, I would have enjoyed this so much more, and it would have been easily one of my favorite animated movies of all time. Glad some of you guys love it though. I really respect that opinion. Then I rewatched Palm Springs, and this is still my favorite movie of the year. Sorry, it just lands everything it needs to perfectly. And it's not just a good movie for all time or anything, it's just a great movie for right now, especially. It's the movie we all need, and I'm so glad it exists. Not the best thing ever, but it's just a solid rom-com that just makes me smile, you know? Then I watched Enola Holmes, that one Netflix movie. I was never planning on watching this ever, but my sisters wanted to see, and I gotta say this is just kind of one of the most mediocre movies I've seen in a while. I didn't care about the story or the characters or just anything that was going on. The execution was cute, and I guess it was kind of cool and funny when it felt like doing so, but it never really commits to that self-aware tone fully. When it comes down to it, it just feels like a trailer setting up for a movie, and the movie never really happens. It's just fine. Just fine. Then I rewatched Shrek 2. I had not seen this movie in so many years, and I remember liking it, but I remembered wrong because this is, no joke, one of the funniest movies I have ever seen. I'm being real with you all right now. My sense of humor is pretty strict. I don't find that many things funny in animated movies especially, but this is easily the funniest animated movie I have personally ever seen. The amount of pop culture references in this is unmatched, but it never feels forced or in your face. It works for the story. Thankfully, it doesn't really waste any time building up the characters in this world. That's what the first movie was for. This one does what all good sequels do. It continues the story with the same characters, but it cuts out all the setup. It's great in that way. There were times where I was crying laughing, and that doesn't happen to me very often, and it does not happen in a really, really long time. Shrek's arc is really interesting, and the movie, when it tries to get serious in the slightest, makes it work. It adds its own signature flavor to the franchise, and it's one of those rare movies that's better than the first because of literally everything I just mentioned. I cannot stress enough how brilliant and cleverly written and hilarious this movie is. Easily one of my favorite animated movies of all time. And just kind of one of my favorite comedies of all time. Then I finished everything off with Onward. Finally. I honestly didn't have much expectation going into it. The trailer just made it look like a pretty fun and generic quest film, and that's exactly what I got. I don't know what it is, but I've never really liked this kind of environment. Creatures and wizards and Dungeons and Dragons. They've never really been my cup of tea, and they've never really given me a reason to get into this world with this film. When you mix that in with a modern take on the world, another atmosphere I do not like, I just didn't really care about the environment it created. The characters had to make it great, right? Well, the characters were likable and passable, but they didn't really stand out to me in any particular way. They didn't really feel like these super unique individuals. They were just kind of sad people who had to deal with loss, you know? Can I add though, Chris Pratt didn't really annoy me that much. Yeah, I said that right. He didn't really bother me. This movie did have a pretty aggressive way of displaying its messages and how it tackled the whole thing with losing a parent. I didn't really like how they approached that. I feel like that's just something Pixar has done a lot, just like, oh, I lost a parent. Oh, it just didn't feel that new. However, I did like how they presented the theme of brotherhood. It was sweet and it worked, but the stuff with the dad I honestly couldn't care less about because it didn't really give me a reason to. It just kind of jumped right into it. With that said, it actually was pretty entertaining the entire runtime. The pacing is so brisk that you can still notice how it's kind of the typical kids movie story beats, but it moves along in a fluid way that you can forgive it for not getting tedious. They do a lot of things I've seen before, but it was just fun. The ending really made up for some of the things that kind of bothered me. It was just a really satisfying way to conclude this narrative. This just kind of felt like a run-of-the-mill Pixar movie, and I expect more out of Pixar at this point. This will probably just remain as one of those just middle-tier Pixar movies, and I don't think it'll go up anytime soon. Glad others were able to see through the predictability and really get something out of the experience, but I didn't. Sorry, but it's still really good. I think it's a good movie. And that's what I saw in November. You see, I promised last month I'd tell you what stuff I saw, and I did it. I'm a reliable YouTuber now, so I guess I'll just promise you the same thing for next month, since it feels like this year is never gonna end. I promise that next month I will upload what I watched in quarantine December edition. There, I did it, alright? Yeah, I'll see you in my next video where I talk about my dog. This is Ethan Butler, and I'm out.